Poppy Hill is a movie that is not about incest. It's a movie about the relationship between a country's past and future and community bonds and youthful passion. There is, factually speaking, zero incest in the movie. However, we spend approximately half the film very, very worried that there might be. Umi is our protagonist, and upon the film's opening, we already know this poor girl is worked to the bone, a full-time B&B manager and a high schooler, and this is only the beginning of her strife. She develops a bond with fellow student Shun, and all seems well until he sees a photo of her father and his friends while at her house, and heartbreak and confusion ensue. Shun got dropped off as a baby to his parents by Umi's dad, who did not clarify the infant's parentage at all, leading to the couple to assume the baby as his. And never asking any more questions about why the guy with a currently pregnant wife has a different newborn baby.
Whose baby is that?
And then he dies. So answers are never given. Shun thinks he and Umi have the same dad, gets weird, tells her they're both sad, but they both still love each other, and it's really awkward and tense and yearny. And then Umi's mom returns from studying abroad, and Umi asks about the mystery baby, and Jamie Lee Curtis explains that the baby was the child of one of Umi's dad's friends who died, and then his wife also died in childbirth, and he didn't want the baby to go to an orphanage, so he adopted it and then immediately gave it away. They rush to find a guy who is friends with both their dads to get the full story, and then they find out that they aren't related, yay, and then the movie literally ends. Aside from the incest scare, this film has a moderately generic B-plot about saving the historic school club building, but other than that, it really is a teen romance incest scare movie. So at the end of it all, when we find out they aren't related, we're left with one burning question. What the hell was the point of all that? It was a convoluted and stressful series of events that would have left our two leads not just heartbroken, but potentially traumatized and scared off romance forever. The emotional flow of this movie is peaceful and humble life with a sweet teen romance, and then the tense and nerve-wracking possibility of incest, and then beleaguered relief of no incest. I am well aware, by the way, that this is not the only Ghibli film with some uncomfortably familial romance in it. Interesting pattern, I guess. Although in this film, to this film's credit, they're not related. They got confused, right? Whose baby is that?
Whose baby is that?
I'm gonna say something that sounds sort of like I'm rocking with incest. I am not, but walk with me here. I think this external barrier to the relationship leads to some really good yearning, very well executed. Is it yearning with incestuous undertones? Yes, sort of. But they aren't actually related. We find that out in the end. I'm not defending incest. I'm defending incest as a narrative device in this film specifically. In a lot of ways, the most vexing part of this movie is that the two leads have some of the best romantic chemistry in maybe any Ghibli movie ever, and like, why did we have to save this for the incest scare movie? Maybe that was the point, to build like additional tension so you really want them to get together and are even more devastated by the possibility of them being related. I don't know. My initial thought when I first watched this movie was that I really wish that they'd taken some artistic liberty and gone for a different central conflict, because my first viewing of this movie gave me some gray hairs. If you are a normal person even approaching average morality, there's a 99% chance you are not going to watch these scenes and go, "Oh, how cute." You're gonna say, "Oh my god, aren't they related?" And then much of the events and emotional resonance of the second half of the film are overshadowed. But realistically, what external factor could create the same result in the story, wherein the actual relationship is undamaged and they both still feel the way they do about each other but can't be together? Usually that's like a feudalism, arranged marriage, royal court situation that would result in a similar outcome, but neither of those things track in this setting. And they also introduce another conflicting factor, which is potential guilt or loyalty to the third party. So what? What other circumstance could create the effect of mutual affection and full support of the people around them, and yet a complete unwillingness to pursue it? We want to be together, and everyone else around us wants us to be together, but we can't. Genuinely, what else could possibly replicate that other than an incest scare? The two leads are also level-headed, mature, rational, and well-adjusted in just about every way. Their personalities are perfectly compatible and not prone to misunderstandings. It's difficult to conceive of another scenario that could produce this story without massive alteration to several major elements of the plot and characters' personalities. It connects back to the theme of remembering and being connected to your past that runs throughout this film also. It's important to demonstrating the effects of the war too, as the reason a lot of the family tree and relational things are so confusing is because of how the Nagasaki and Hiroshima bombings, as well as other aspects of the post-war era, destroyed family trees and created so many orphans. The breakneck pace at which Japan modernized in the 50s and 60s and moved from agricultural to industrial right after two devastating bombings meant a lot of things got left in the dust. I think it's easy for people on the other side of the world to sometimes underestimate how much the bombings changed Japan and how much the aftershock is still felt by its people. Also, does having something taboo or immoral included in a film make it a bad film? No, obviously. But incest is one of those things that basically never feels like it enhances the story unless there's some critique and or unpacking of incest going on, which this movie isn't really concerned with. It's more so concerned with post-war Japan and how that environment could lead to this situation. The reason the incest plot was weird and didn't resonate with a lot of Western viewers is likely in part due to a lack of cultural understanding of the effects of World War II on Japan and what that rebuilding process was like. When a non-Japanese person says, "The movie is nice, but I wish they replaced the incest with something else," they are missing the fact that the blurry family history was a very real result of the atomic bombs and extremely thematically poignant for a film about the ways in which a nation approaches the future when rebuilding from a war. This is also why it's important that the Tokyo Olympics are upcoming during the events of the film. It's a chance for Japan to move forward from those events and show a new face to the rest of the world. I've seen a lot of Western Ghibli fans who dismiss the incest thing as being pointless and padding out time, or saying something along the lines of using it for shock value to get people's attention, because obviously Ghibli and Hayao Miyazaki are famous for their use of cheap shock value. I get sort of frustrated by people calling it cheap as a plot device, or saying it should have been replaced, when it is deeply intertwined with the thematic fabric of the film, unfortunately. Plus, I think there does tend to be an overly rose-tinted and idyllic perception of Japan and Japanese history sometimes. Most Ghibli films are not representational, but somewhat aspirational. This film is very feel-good and relatively peaceful, but there was a great deal of protests and political contention in the early 60s in Japan. It was not necessarily an idyllic time to be living there. Perhaps it's also the fact that Ghibli movies are associated with comfort and feel-goodness, that the fact that something so taboo and uncomfortable is in the film feels incongruent with audience expectation. This disparity makes the movie feel like it's bad art in a way, because it doesn't feel like it fulfills its intended function as being a feel-good family Ghibli film. However, I also think that these complaints originate not only from a lack of cultural context and whatnot, but also from a moralizing instinct many people have when consuming media. People tend to struggle and grapple and need to come to a safe, clean final judgment with taboo subjects or morally gray characters instead of just meeting them where they are. Sort of like how people are constantly arguing about whether Jinx from Arcane is a good person or not, when the whole point of her character is that it's complicated. Accepting that without a black or white moral judgment is difficult for a lot of people. It's either this character is problematic and not a good person, or this part of the movie made me uncomfortable so it's bad / they should take it out, without bothering to look further into why the uncomfortable thing might be there or why the fictional character might do morally ambiguous things. A lot of things are weird and uncomfortable in life, and I think it's more healthy to think about why it exists in the fiction and why it feels uncomfortable than to slam the out of sight, out of mind button. Either way, I think there's a lot of other things to focus on and appreciate about this film too. The dynamic between the two characters and the animation details and how good some of the dialogue actually is and how good the dub is.
Wow, it's really hot.
Fire often is.
We as human beings have complicated every simple gift of the gods!
Quoting Diogenes.
Shout out to my goat Jamie Lee Curtis. these things sort of fall to the wayside when the audience fixates on the possible, brother-sister thing. Anyway, I'm not really in favor of incest plot twists like 90% of the time, but this is an exception for me. I think the setting, historical context, and execution justify its existence, and also in fact the film really just doesn't work the same way without it. It is kind of integral to the function. Anyway, this movie's good, and I understand why people are kind of put off by the whole do we have the same dad subplot, because it is uncomfortable. It was kind of weird. The first time I watched it, I was also pretty weirded out. I kind of had a similar thought process, but the more I sit with it and watching it a second time, it's like, no, I get why this is here. And like, it's definitely not a pro-incest movie. It is generally regarded as a absolute obstacle to there being a romantic relationship, which is generally something I would agree with. So yes, the movie has a weird, uncomfortable twist, but it historically, contextually makes sense within the setting. And also, just because there's a thing that makes me uncomfortable in this movie does not mean I'm willing to jump to the conclusion that the movie itself is flawed on that basis. Give it a shot. Give the Ghibli incest movie a shot. I like broke out into a sweat trying to defend the incest movie. That's probably not good.